My name is Natalie O'Brien. I'm 31 years old, and for 8 years my family treated me like a bank account that happened to have a pulse. The strange part, for most of those 8 years I let them. I work as a senior logistics coordinator for a Fortune 500 company. Between salary and bonuses, I make enough to live comfortably, but I've never considered myself rich. I'm simply careful. Painfully careful, according to my family. I track expenses. I max out my retirement contributions. I keep an emergency fund. I bought a modest townhouse at 26 and attacked the mortgage until it was gone. My younger sister, Shannon, called that lifestyle financial anxiety, disguised as responsibility. Shannon was 28 and had been our family's golden child practically since birth. When I was 14, I spent weekends hauling mulch and trimming hedges for a landscaping company. I saved almost everything because I wanted my own car. Shannon eventually received one from our parents. Brand new. When college came, I worked nights loading packages to keep my loans manageable. Mom and Dad poured tens of thousands into Shannon's private school education. After graduation, Shannon spent 6 years finding herself. Pottery, crypto, a podcast, dropshipping, life coaching. Then came social media consulting. Every new obsession was supposedly the one that would finally change everything. Her boyfriend, Mason Reed, encouraged all of it. Mason was 27, handsome, in that carefully, effortless Instagram way, and described himself online as a lifestyle strategist. I never figured out what that meant. Together, they rented an exposed brick downtown loft for more than $4,000 a month, while somehow being perpetually surprised when rent became due. Guess who handled the surprises? Me. The moment everything changed happened 3 months before I finally cut them off. Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Mom was making lasagna. Dad was watching golf. I was setting the table when Shannon arrived nearly an hour late. She dropped her keys on the counter and glanced through the window. "You're still driving that Camry." I kept folding napkins. "It still runs." Shannon laughed. "Natalie, you're 31. Don't you want a car with some personality? It gets good mileage." Mason entered behind her and gave me a sympathetic smile. "You're very comfortable with mediocrity, aren't you?" My hand stopped. There are insults that hurt because they're cruel. Then there are insults that become funny when they're delivered by someone whose phone bill you're paying. I looked at him. "Sorry." He shrugged. "You never take risks." Shannon opened the refrigerator. "Exactly. Same company, same house, same car. Aren't you scared you'll wake up at 50 and realize you never actually lived?" I stared at my sister. "You mean, lived like you?" She grinned. "Exactly. $4,000 apartment." Her smile disappeared slightly. "It's an investment in our lifestyle." "On what income?" Mom appeared, carrying the lasagna. "Girls, please." But something inside me had already cracked. Shannon rolled her eyes. "You always do this." "Do what?" "Act superior because you're obsessed with money." I put the silverware down. "Last month, who paid your rent shortage?" Silence. Mason crossed his arms. "That was temporary." "And the month before?" Natalie, Mom warned. I ignored her. "Who pays Shannon's phone bill?" Shannon's cheeks reddened. "I told you. I'll repay you." "When? Why does everything need a deadline with you?" "Because that's generally how repayment works." Dad muted the television. "That's enough." Normally that would have stopped me. That evening it didn't. I looked toward my parents. How many times did I cover utilities here when Dad's hours were reduced? Dad's expression hardened. "That's family business." "Exactly. And apparently family business means Natalie pays." Shannon slammed her soda onto the counter. "Here comes Saint Natalie." I laughed once. "Know who more? You stand here criticizing my boring life, while my boring paycheck keeps your exciting one functioning." Mason stepped closer. "Nobody forces you to help us." The entire kitchen went silent. I looked at him, and something clicked. He was right. Nobody forced me. Mom guilted me. Dad pressured me. Shannon manipulated me. But ultimately, I kept saying yes. I slowly nodded. "You're absolutely right, Mason." His confidence, vanished. Dad immediately sensed the shift. Natalie, don't start being dramatic. But I wasn't angry anymore. That was what frightened them. I looked around the kitchen at 4 people who had somehow convinced themselves that my stability belonged to everyone. Natalie's got it right. Nobody answered. Emergency Natalie's got it. Rent Natalie. Utilities Natalie. Shannon has another business idea. Call Natalie. Nobody said that, Mom whispered. You didn't have to. I picked up my purse. Enjoy dinner, Natalie. I walked out. That night, I didn't cry. I opened Excel. If my family wanted to treat our relationship like a financial arrangement, fine. I wanted to know the numbers. I pulled bank statements, payment histories, transfers, emails, screenshots, and messages. Every, I'll pay you Friday. Every, just until next month. Every emergency. Shannon's rent. Car payments. Business experiments. Credit cards. Subscriptions. My parents' utilities. Repairs. Medical expenses. Mortgage shortages. At 2:47 a.m., I finally calculated the total. I stared at the screen. More than $230. 000. 8 years of being the responsible daughter had cost me nearly $250,000. And somehow, I was still the selfish one. My phone buzzed. Shannon. Need $1.200. Landlord is being insane again. Can you send it tonight? For several seconds, my thumb hovered over the screen. Muscle. Memory. Normally I'd complain, send the money, and hate myself afterward. Instead, I typed one word. No. Her response arrived almost immediately. What? Then? Natalie, seriously. It's only $1.200. I replied, exactly. Figure it out. My phone rang. Shannon. Decline. Mom. Decline. Dad. Decline. Then Mason. I switched the phone off. The next morning, I called my closest friend from work, Julia Mercer. She came over after work and stared at my spreadsheet. Natalie. I know. This is insane. I know. You gave them all this. Apparently. Julia looked at me carefully. What are you going to do? I glanced at the screen. Then I smiled. Learn how to say no. Over the following days, I organized everything. Statements. Message. Promises. Transfers. I even created a separate LLC called Apex Holdings for future investments. Something I'd been considering for months but never bothered finishing. It seemed insignificant then. It wouldn't stay insignificant. 2 weeks after I stopped responding to small money requests, Mom texted me. Important family discussion about Shannon's future. Sunday. Please come. I almost refused. Instead, I slipped a small recorder into my purse before leaving. Something told me I'd want a record. When I arrived, the living room looked like a business presentation. Chairs arranged neatly. Coffee table cleared. Shannon had a leather portfolio. Mason had a laptop. Dad pointed toward the couch. Sit. I did. Shannon launched into a presentation about a social media marketing agency she and Mason wanted to build. Potential clients. Office space. Revenu projection. Brand storytelling. Scalability. 20 minutes of polished vocabulary disguising one obvious problem. They had no money. Finally, I interrupted. How much? Shannon paused. Mason looked at her. She inhaled. 50,000. I almost smiled. Absolutely not. Dad leaned forward. You haven't even considered it. I've considered the previous 8 years. Mason spoke quickly. It isn't charity. You'd receive equity. In what? Our company. You don't have a company. Shannon's face hardened. You never believe in me. I've believed in you more than $230. 000 worth. Mom gasped. You've been keeping score. That sentence almost broke my heart. Instead, it clarified everything. Yes, I said quietly. I finally started. Shannon stood. You're jealous. Of what? I'm willing to take risks. You're terrified of living. I looked at her. My supposedly boring life has financed yours. Dad slammed his palm against the table. Enough. Everyone froze. He pointed at me. You will help your sister. No. Natalie. I said no. His face turned red. You're going to loan Shannon the $50,000 until she figures things out. No. His voice dropped. Then don't come back here. Mom whispered Richard. But Dad didn't stop. If you care more about money than family, you're not welcome in this house. My heartbeat slowed. This was the moment. I looked directly at him. Are you giving me an ultimatum? Yes. Fund Shannon or I'm no longer welcome. You heard me. I looked at Mom. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Shannon folded her arms. Mason remained silent. 4 people waiting for me to surrender. I stood. All right. Dad blinked. All right, what? I won't come back. I picked up my purse. Mom suddenly followed me. Natalie, don't leave like this. I turned at the doorway. You're not losing me because I refuse to give Shannon $50,000. My voice trembled for the first time. You're losing me because you decided $50,000 was the price of being your daughter. Nobody answered. I walked outside. The door closed behind me. Inside my purse, the recorder had captured everything. I sat in my car for several minutes, staring at the house where I'd spent half my childhood trying to become the daughter my parents could be proud of. Then I started the engine. They thought they'd forced me out. What they didn't understand was that nearly every comfortable part of their lives still had my fingerprints on it. Phone plans, insurance, subscriptions, automatic payments, emergency accounts, bills. And Monday morning every single one of those fingerprints was going to disappear. The family bank was about to close. Permanently. Monday morning at exactly 7:03 I started cutting the cords. Not metaphorically. Literally every financial connection my family had to me. First, the phone plan. Shannon and Mason had been attached to my account for almost 3 years because combining lines was cheaper for everyone. Cheaper for them, apparently. I removed both numbers. Next came Shannon's auto insurance. Gone. The automatic transfers I'd set up for my parents' utilities. Cancelled. The credit card, where Shannon was an authorized user for emergencies. Removed. Streaming accounts. Cloud storage. Prime membership. Every little subscription I'd absorbed because arguing about $15 somehow felt more exhausting than simply paying it. Gone. It took less than 2 hours to dismantle 8 years of enabling. At 911, I sent one message to the family group chat. Effective immediately, I'm no longer paying anyone else's expenses. No loans. No investments. No emergency transfers. No temporary help. No exceptions. Please organize your finances accordingly. Then I muted the conversation. The first call came from Shannon, before I'd even put my phone down. The second came 30 seconds later. By lunchtime, I'd stopped counting. Her messages evolved rapidly. Are you serious? Then, my phone isn't working. Then, Natalie, this is childish. Then, you can't just do this without warning. That one made me laugh. Without warning, apparently 8 years of unpaid loans followed by a $50,000 demand, and an ultimatum hadn't counted as warning. Mom's messages were different. More precise. More painful. I didn't raise you to abandon your family. Your sister is devastated. Your father hasn't slept. Please stop punishing everyone because you're angry. Dad skipped guilt entirely. Don't expect an inheritance. Then, as far as I'm concerned, I have one daughter now. I stared at that sentence longer than I should have. It hurt. Of course it hurt. Cutting people off financially is easy compared with accepting what their reaction tells you. Julia found me sitting alone in the break room that afternoon. You okay? I locked my phone. Apparently I'm no longer a daughter. She sat across from me. Because you wouldn't give away $50,000. When you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous. Natalie, it is ridiculous. I looked down at my coffee. I still feel guilty. Feeling guilty doesn't mean you're guilty. That stayed with me. Because the following weeks were brutal. Without me quietly filling every gap, Shannon's carefully curated life began collapsing almost immediately. She took a full-time position at a tire shop's front office. Mason started waiting tables while applying for marketing jobs. Their expensive loft became impossible to maintain, and they eventually moved somewhere cheaper. My parents weren't doing much better. Dad picked up weekend shifts at a home improvement store. Mom canceled vacations and started cutting expenses she'd always considered essential. For the first time, everyone was living according to what they actually earned. And somehow they survived. That realization changed something inside me. They had never been helpless. They had simply been protected from consequences. About 3 weeks later, Julia called me late one evening. "I heard something about your parents." My stomach tightened. "What?" "They're having mortgage trouble." I sat straighter. "How bad?" "Bad enough that someone mentioned foreclosure." The old Natalie immediately woke up. My first thought was, how much do they need? My second thought stopped me. No, I wasn't doing this again. But curiosity got the better of me. Through proper professional channels, and with help from people who understood distressed debt far better than I did, I learned the basic situation. My parents had fallen months behind. They still owed a significant balance, but the house itself was worth considerably more. Their lender was moving toward resolving the delinquent loan. I couldn't understand it. I'd helped them with mortgage shortages before. Where had their money gone? Then I remembered. That was exactly the problem. Whenever they ran short, I had appeared. They had never needed to learn why. I spoke with an attorney and a financial professional before doing anything. That part mattered. I wasn't interested in a legal revenge. I wanted distance, documentation, and control over my own money. Eventually, an opportunity arose for Apex Holdings, the LLC. I'd recently established to acquire the distressed mortgage note through legitimate channels. When the paperwork finally closed, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the documents. Apex Holdings now held the loan secured by my parents' house. My parents didn't know I owned Apex, and I intended to keep it that way. Standard notices informed them that servicing had changed. Mom called me days later, not to apologize, to complain. Some company bought our mortgage. I nearly dropped my coffee. "Oh, Apex something. Your father thinks they're vultures." I stared out the window. "That's unfortunate. We're trying to figure things out." There was a pause. The old rhythm emerged. I knew what was supposed to come next. "Natalie, could you possibly help?" But Mom didn't ask. Maybe pride stopped her. Maybe Dad had forbidden it. Either way, I was grateful. After reviewing everything with professionals, Apex offered them a structured path to cure the default. For 12 months, they would make elevated payments to demonstrate reliability and address the delinquency. If they completed the plan successfully, the company would offer a more sustainable, permanent modification. The first call to the servicing line came almost immediately. "Dad," I answered professionally. "This is servicing." He didn't recognize my voice. Through the formal tone, an unfamiliar number. "This payment is ridiculous." I closed my eyes. There was something surreal about hearing my father argue with me, as though I were a stranger. I explained the arrangement calmly. He interrupted repeatedly, threatened to complain, demanded alternatives. I kept returning to the same point. There was a path forward. Accept it, or pursue another lawful option. Finally, his anger burned itself out. "If we make every payment," he said, "the loan gets modified." "Yes." "And the permanent payment becomes manageable." "Yes." Long silence. "Send the paperwork." When the call ended, my hands were shaking. Not because I'd enjoyed it, because for the first time, Dad had accepted financial boundaries from me. He just hadn't known they were mine. The next 12 months were almost unbelievable. Every payment arrived. On time. Dad kept both jobs. Mom reduced expenses. Shannon even began contributing occasionally. They complained, certainly, but they paid. And when the 12-month period ended successfully, Apex offered the promised modification. Lower interest. Extended term. A payment they could actually manage. Dad called again. "This doesn't make sense." "What doesn't?" "You're lowering our payment. You completed the required plan." He sounded suspicious. "Why would your company help us?" I stared at the family photograph still sitting on my bookshelf. Because responsible borrowers who demonstrate consistency deserve workable terms. Dad went quiet. For one strange second, I wondered if he recognized me. Then he said, "Well, thank you." 2 words. He had no idea who he was thanking. I ended the call and cried, Not triumphantly, quietly. Because somewhere beneath all the anger, I'd still wanted my parents to succeed. I just no longer wanted their survival to require my sacrifice. Life settled into an uneasy silence. Then, 18 months after the Sunday dinner that started everything, Shannon called. I almost ignored it. Something made me answer. Hello, Natalie. Her voice sounded different, nervous. Mason and I are getting married. I leaned against my kitchen counter. Congratulations. 3 weeks from Saturday. I waited. We want you there. Why? Because you're my sister. I almost laughed at the irony. Instead, I said, I'll think about it. 3 weeks later, I walked into Spring Creek Country Club, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, heels, and the kind of calm that comes when you finally stopped asking people to approve of you. Mom cried when she saw me. Dad offered an awkward handshake. Shannon hugged me carefully. Mason looked genuinely surprised I'd come. The ceremony was beautiful. During their vows, Shannon promised to support Mason's dreams. Mason promised to build a future based on honesty and partnership. Those words stayed with me. Honesty. Maybe that was why I finally did what I did. During the reception, Shannon's best friend was giving a speech about dreams, ambition, and believing in yourself. I stood. Could I say something? The room quieted. Shannon's smile froze. I took the microphone. My name is Natalie. I'm Shannon's older sister. I looked around at relatives who had heard countless versions of why I'd disappeared. I want to tell you something about dreams. Then I told them. Not every humiliating detail, just enough. 8 years. More than $230 0 inches financial support. Rent. Cars. Bills. Emergencies. Failed ventures. Then the final request. $50,000. And when I refused, I said, my father told me I could fund Shannon's business or stop coming home. Dad's face turned crimson. Mom whispered my name. I continued. After that, my parents fell behind on their mortgage. The room became completely silent. The bank eventually transferred that distress loan to a private investment company. I looked directly at Dad. That company was Apex Holdings. His expression changed. Then realization hit. Mom covered her mouth. Shannon stared at me. I said the final words carefully. Apex Holdings belongs to me. Someone near the back actually gasped. For the last 18 months you've been making mortgage payments to my company. Dad stood. You. But here's what matters. I raised my hand. Your payment is now lower than it was before. You kept your house. You proved you could meet your obligations. I didn't take anything away from you. I looked at Shannon. I stopped preventing you from experiencing consequences. Nobody spoke. I handed the microphone back. Congratulations on the wedding. Then I walked out. My phone began vibrating before I reached the parking lot. Mom? Dad? Shannon? Mason? I ignored every call. Because Julia was already waiting outside in her car. She lowered the window. Well, I opened the passenger door. Better than expected. She grinned. You ready? I looked back toward the country club. Absolutely. There was one final detail my family didn't know. Months earlier, my company had offered me a major promotion. European logistics operations, higher salary, housing allowance, relocation package, a fresh start, and roughly 4,000 miles between me and the O'Brien family drama. Julia drove me directly to the airport. As the terminal came into view, I finally switched my phone off. The next morning I would wake up somewhere nobody knew Natalie O'Brien as the responsible daughter. Nobody would know me as Shannon's emergency fund. Nobody would know me as the woman who always fixed everything. For the first time in my adult life, I could simply be Natalie. Destination. Amsterdam. And Amsterdam didn't feel like revenge. It felt like oxygen. I landed on a rainy Tuesday morning with 2 suitcases, 1 laptop bag, and the strange realization that nobody within thousands of miles expected me to solve their problems before breakfast. My company had transferred me to oversee a major portion of our European logistics operation. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase, corporate housing, relocation expenses, and more responsibility than I'd ever handled before. Normally, that would have terrified me. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. My apartment overlooked a narrow canal, lined with crooked buildings that looked as though they'd been leaning toward one another for centuries. The first night I sat beside the window eating takeout while bicycles rattled across the bridge below. No calls. No emergencies. No one asking for money. The silence should have felt lonely. It didn't. It felt expensive. And for once, I could afford it. My first month disappeared into work. New systems. New colleagues. New routes. New problems that actually belonged to me. I learned how to navigate trams, where to buy groceries without accidentally purchasing buttermilk instead of regular milk, and that Dutch people could make brutally direct statements without intending them as insults. Most importantly, I learned what happened when I stopped organizing my life around my family's next crisis. I had time. Actual time. I joined coworkers for dinner. I started running along the canals. I took weekend trains simply because I could. Paris. Brussels. Cologne. Places I'd always told myself I'd visit someday. Apparently someday arrived when I stopped paying other people's bills. My family didn't disappear, of course. During the first few weeks, Mom sent photographs. The house. The backyard. An old Christmas ornament I'd made in elementary school. Home isn't the same without you. I didn't answer. Shannon sent updates. Mason and I are doing well. Then, work has actually been pretty good. Then, bizarrely, thanks for asking. I hadn't asked. Dad lasted almost 2 months before contacting me. Your mother misses you. We should discuss this like adults. I stared at the message. The old Natalie would have written 3 paragraphs explaining herself. The new Natalie put the phone down and went to dinner. By month 3, the apology tour began. Mom admitted they might not have handled things perfectly. Dad said emotions had been high. Mason said he hadn't understood how much money I'd contributed over the years. Shannon went further. I know I was bad with money. I'm trying to change. Trying. It was the first message that didn't make me angry. But change is something people prove, not something they announce. So I waited. Meanwhile, my own life kept moving. That's when I met Dan Vermeer. It happened at a logistics conference in Rotterdam. He worked in marketing strategy for a Dutch technology company and had been invited to speak about European consumer behavior. He was tall, annoyingly composed, and possessed the kind of confidence that didn't need to advertise itself. We ended up standing beside each other during a painfully boring networking reception. He looked at the tiny appetizer in his hand. Is this dinner? I sincerely hope not. He smiled. You're American. Was the complaining too obvious? The portion expectations. I laughed. That was how it started. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became another dinner. Then another. Don never asked what I earned, never hinted that my corporate housing was impressive, never talked about investments he needed help funding. On our 4th date, the check arrived. Without thinking, I reached for it. Don reached too. I've got it, I said. So do I. No, really. He looked at me strangely. Natalie, I invited you. I don't mind paying. I know. Something about his tone made me stop. He wasn't testing me. He wasn't waiting to see whether I'd rescue him. He simply intended to pay for dinner. Such a ridiculous little thing. And yet I almost cried in the restaurant bathroom afterward. That was when I realized how deeply my family had rewired me. I had learned to interpret love as usefulness. If someone needed me, they loved me. If I could solve their problem, I had value. Don didn't need me. And somehow, he still wanted me around. That terrified me more than any financial crisis ever had. Months passed. Our relationship deepened slowly. I eventually told him everything. The loans. The ultimatum. Apex Holdings. The wedding revelation. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back. That is either the most organized revenge story I've ever heard, or the strangest mortgage investment strategy in history. I laughed. Probably both. Then his expression became serious. Do you want them to suffer? The question caught me off guard. I used to, and now, I thought about it. I want them to stop needing me. Dan nodded. That sounds different. It was. Back home, the mortgage payments continued arriving on time. Month after month. My parents were actually budgeting. Shannon kept working. Mason found a stable marketing position. Nobody collapsed. Nobody starved. Nobody became homeless because Natalie stopped fixing things. Their lives simply became less glamorous. Mine became larger. A year after arriving in Amsterdam, I was promoted again. Regional director for Northern Europe. I bought a small weekend cottage outside the city. Nothing extravagant. A garden, solar panels, a little office overlooking fields. Don teased me because I created a spreadsheet for vegetable planting. Of course you did. Tomatoes require planting. They require dirt. That's why you're in marketing. By then, my Dutch was good enough to embarrass myself confidently. I had friends who invited me to dinner because they wanted my company. People who didn't know my credit score. People who had never asked me for an emergency transfer. Then, one evening nearly 8 months after I'd moved, Shannon sent a message that felt different from all the others. Natalie, I know you probably won't answer this. I almost closed it. Instead, I kept reading. She admitted that having to work full-time had changed her. She admitted she'd treated my help as something automatic. She said she had confused being supported with being entitled to support. Then came the sentence that stopped me. Losing access to your money wasn't the worst part. Losing my sister was. I read it 3 times. There was no request attached. No emergency. No guilt. No, but just an apology. I put my phone down. Don looked over from the couch. You okay? I think my sister finally apologized. Are you going to answer? I stared at the screen. Not yet. And I didn't. Forgiveness and access weren't the same thing. I could stop hating Shannon without immediately allowing her back into my life. By the end of my 2nd year in Amsterdam, Dawn had moved in with me. My career was thriving. My savings had grown dramatically. My parents hadn't missed a mortgage payment. For the first time, I actually believed the war was ending. Then, Shannon sent an email to my work address. The subject line was, "You won. Let's end this." I opened it immediately. The message was unusually short. She said the family understood. They accepted that I wanted nothing to do with them. They wanted closure. No more messages. No more attempts at reconciliation. No more drama. I should have felt relieved. Instead, every instinct I had told me something was wrong. Shannon didn't write like that. Mom didn't surrender that easily. And Dad definitely didn't accept losing control without having the last word. I showed Don. He read it twice. Maybe they finally understand. Maybe. You don't believe that? No. Why? I couldn't explain it logically. The message feels too clean. 2 weeks later, Julia called me from the States. It was after midnight in Amsterdam. I almost didn't answer. Then, I saw her name. Julia. Natalie. Are you sitting down? My stomach tightened. What happened? Your family filed something against you. I sat upright. What? A restraining order petition. For several seconds, I genuinely thought I'd misunderstood her. A restraining order. It gets worse. How? They're claiming you've been psychologically harassing them through financial control. I stared across the dark bedroom. Daan woke beside me. Julia continued. They've also filed a civil claim involving the mortgage. They want the court to force Apex to sell the note back under terms favorable to them. I almost laughed. Julia, I haven't contacted them in over a year. I know. How am I harassing people I don't speak to? Apparently, your silence is part of the harassment. That time, I did laugh. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes reality becomes so absurd your body runs out of appropriate reactions. The next morning, I contacted Catherine Hale, the attorney, who had helped me structure everything properly. She reviewed the filing, then called me. Natalie, how bad? There was a pause. Then Catherine started laughing. That depends. On what? Whether you're asking legally or intellectually. Legally. We're fine. I exhaled. Intellectually. I may never recover. I smiled despite myself. Catherine explained that the petition contained accusations, but remarkably little evidence. They portrayed me as a wealthy, vindictive daughter, controlling the family home from Europe. They claimed my ownership of the mortgage created constant psychological fear. They described my refusal to communicate as emotional punishment. But there was one enormous problem. I had records. Years of them. The spreadsheet I'd created. after that Sunday dinner. The transfers, the repayment promises, the $50,000 demand, and most importantly, the recording. Dad's voice, clear as day. You're going to help your sister, or you're not welcome in this house anymore. Suddenly, that little recorder in my purse didn't seem paranoid. It seemed prophetic. The hearing was scheduled for the following month. I booked a flight. Dan offered to come. I shook my head. I need to do this myself. At Schiphol Airport, he hugged me before security. You don't have to prove anything to them. I know. Do you? I looked at him. That question followed me all the way across the Atlantic. Because maybe he was right. For years, I'd thought this fight was about proving that my family had exploited me. But sitting on that plane, I finally understood something. I didn't need their admission anymore. I didn't need Mom to say she failed me. I didn't need Dad to admit Shannon was the favorite. I didn't even need Shannon to repay every dollar. I needed one thing, for this to end. When I landed, Catherine picked me up. There was a thick case file on the back seat. She tapped it. 8 years of evidence. I looked through the window at the city I'd once called home. Think it's enough? Catherine smiled. Natalie, they've accused a woman living 4,000 miles away who hasn't contacted them in more than a year of harassing them by refusing to speak to them. She started the car. They haven't filed a lawsuit. What did they file? A confession with court fees. For the first time since Julia's call, I smiled. The next morning, I stood outside the courthouse. My parents were already inside. So were Shannon and Mason. They had come prepared to convince a judge that I was the monster in their story. I came carrying something much simpler. Receipts. 8 years of them. And this time there would be nowhere left for the truth to hide. The courthouse smelled like old paper, burnt coffee, and consequences. I arrived 20 minutes early with Catherine beside me, and 8 years of documentation packed into 2 thick binders. My family was already there. Mom looked older. That was the first thing I noticed. Not defeated. Not ruined. Just older. Dad sat rigidly beside her, wearing the same dark suit he'd worn to Shannon's wedding. Shannon was several seats away, with Mason whispering to their attorney. When Shannon noticed me, she stopped talking. For a moment, neither of us moved. 2 years earlier, I probably would have searched her expression for guilt. That morning, I felt strangely calm. Natalie, Mom whispered. I nodded once. Mom. Dad wouldn't look at me. Their attorney approached Catherine and introduced himself. Catherine shook his hand politely, then leaned toward me. Don't react to anything. I wasn't planning to. Good. She glanced at my father. Because I suspect they're about to tell a very creative story. They did. Their attorney described my parents as ordinary people trapped in an emotionally abusive financial arrangement controlled by their estranged daughter. According to him, Apex Holdings wasn't an investment. It was a weapon. My silence wasn't distance. It was punishment. My ownership of the mortgage created continuous psychological pressure. Then he claimed my family feared what I might do next. I sat perfectly still. Catherine wrote something on her legal pad and slid it toward me. They contacted you 47 times during the period they're describing. I nearly smiled. Their attorney continued. He described me as obsessive, vindictive, controlling, a successful woman who had supposedly used financial sophistication to dominate less financially knowledgeable relatives. Then came the mortgage. He argued that because Apex Holdings was controlled by me, the court should intervene and somehow compel a resolution that allowed my parents to regain control of the debt under more favorable conditions. The judge interrupted. Counselor, are the petitioners current on the mortgage? He hesitated. Yes, Your Honor. Has Apex initiated foreclosure? No. Increased the agreed interest rate? No. Rejected payments? No. Violated the modification agreement? Another pause. Not technically. The judge looked over her glasses. Not technically. No, Your Honor. I saw Catherine suppress a smile. Then, it was our turn. She stood. Your Honor, this case becomes considerably simpler when viewed chronologically. She opened the first binder, and my family's story began unraveling. Not because Catherine shouted. She didn't need to. She simply presented dates, transfers, message, promises, 8 years of money flowing in one direction. From me to them, she displayed records showing more than $230 0 inches assistance. Rent, car expenses, utilities, credit cards, failed business ideas, mortgage shortages, emergency expenses. Then, she produced messages, promising repayment. I'll get you Friday. Just until next month. I'll pay everything back after this business takes off. Again. Shannon stared at the table. Catherine moved to the next section. The conflict escalated when Miss O'Brien refused an additional request for $50,000. Their attorney objected. The judge allowed Catherine to continue. Then she played the recording. My father's voice filled the courtroom. You're going to help your sister or you're not welcome in this house anymore. I hadn't heard it in almost 2 years. My stomach tightened anyway. Then my own voice. Are you giving me an ultimatum? Dad. I'm telling you how it's going to be. The recording ended. Nobody moved. Catherine let the silence breathe. After that conversation, my client stopped providing voluntary financial support. She explained Apex. The acquisition. The delinquency. The structured payment plan. The eventual modification. Then she said something I hadn't expected. The modification actually improved the petitioner's long-term position. The judge looked toward my parents. Your payment decreased. Dad reluctantly nodded. Yes. How much? He answered quietly. The judge looked back at their attorney. So the defendant allegedly used the mortgage to terrorize your clients by lowering their payment after they demonstrated consistent repayment. Their attorney shifted uncomfortably. The issue is the emotional leverage. What leverage? They knew she could potentially. Did she threaten foreclosure? No. Threaten eviction? No. Demand money outside the loan agreement? No. Contact them repeatedly? Their attorney hesitated again. No. The judge frowned. Then where is the harassment? That was the question their entire case couldn't survive. Their attorney argued that my refusal to communicate had caused emotional distress. The judge stared at him. You are asking for a restraining order against someone because she won't communicate with your clients. Silence. Even I couldn't believe we'd reached that sentence. Catherine presented communication records showing that I hadn't initiated contact in more than a year. Meanwhile, members of my family had repeatedly messaged me. Mom, Dad, Shannon, even Mason. The judge turned toward their table. If Miss O'Brien frightens you to the degree described in this petition, why are you repeatedly attempting to contact her? Nobody answered. 20-something minutes later, it was over. The restraining order petition was denied. The accompanying civil claims failed. And because of the nature of the filing, my family was left facing my legal costs as well. Outside the courtroom, Catherine touched my shoulder. It's finished. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I looked across the hallway. Mom was crying quietly. Dad looked furious, but exhausted. Shannon stood motionless. Mason had one arm around her. This wasn't the triumphant ending I'd imagined during those angry nights years earlier. It was sad. 4 people had spent years treating money as proof of love. And I had spent years allowing money to become the language through which I communicated with them. Shannon walked toward me. Catherine immediately stepped closer. But I shook my head. It's okay. Shannon stopped several feet away. Did you enjoy that? No. She looked surprised. You embarrassed us. You brought me to court. Her eyes filled. We wanted the mortgage back. Then you could have asked to refinance. Dad said you'd never agree. I looked past her toward him. Did anyone actually ask me? She didn't answer. That was our family in one sentence. Assumptions. Pressure. Manipulation. Anything except an honest conversation. I walked away. But the story didn't stay inside that courtroom. Court filings were public, and details eventually spread through local social media groups. People discussed the money, the loans, the failed case, the mortgage, my family's attempt to characterize my silence as harassment. Shannon became the center of gossip. My parents had lived in the same neighborhood for decades, and suddenly people knew far more about our family finances than anyone wanted. I didn't celebrate that. Public humiliation wasn't part of my plan. But consequences rarely ask permission before multiplying. Shannon's employment situation deteriorated. My parents withdrew socially. The failed legal action also created additional financial pressure through the legal costs they were ordered to cover. Months earlier, I might have enjoyed watching them struggle. Instead, sitting in my Amsterdam apartment after returning home, I realized I was tired. Not tired of fighting them, tired of being connected to them through debt. I called Catherine. I won out. Out of what? The mortgage. She paused. You could hold it. They've been paying consistently. I know. It's a performing asset. I know. Then why sell? I looked across the room. Dan was making coffee. Because that was the moment I finally understood the difference between winning and being free. I don't want my parents sending money to me every month anymore. Catherine was silent. Then she said, I understand. We helped facilitate a conventional refinance through an independent lender. My parents had now demonstrated years of consistent payments. Their finances were healthier. Their employment was more stable. They qualified. The new lender paid off Apex Holdings. The mortgage relationship between us ended. I stared at the final payoff statement for several minutes. 8 years earlier, I would have seen the number. Now I saw the absence of one. No connection. No obligation. No leverage. Freedom. When I told Don it was finished, he smiled. So you're no longer your parents' bank? No. And your sisters? Definitely not. He handed me coffee. Then who are you? I smiled. Natalie. That should have been the ending. But several months later, I received an email from Shannon. No dramatic subject line. No accusation. Just, can we talk sometime? No money. No favors. Just talk. I stared at it for almost an hour. Then I wrote back. Sunday, 20 minutes. The call was awkward. Painfully awkward. For the first 5 minutes we discussed weather. Then work. Shannon told me she'd started keeping a budget. I laughed. You. I know. She laughed too. And suddenly, for half a second, she sounded like the little sister I remembered before money poisoned everything between us. Then, she became serious. I meant what I said before. What? That losing you was worse than losing the money. I didn't answer. I thought you helped because you were better than us, she continued. And I hated you for making me feel irresponsible. I never wanted you to feel that way. I know that now. She swallowed. I think I made you the villain because admitting you were right meant admitting what I'd become. That hurt differently. Not like an insult, like truth. Shannon, you don't have to forgive me. I don't know if I do yet. I understand. There was no explosion. No guilt trip. No request. Just silence. Then she said, I miss my sister. I looked through the window. Amsterdam shimmered beneath a light rain. I miss mine too. That wasn't reconciliation. Not completely, but it was a door. And this time, nobody had attached a price tag to opening it. 2 years after moving to Amsterdam, my life barely resembles the one I left behind. My career has grown beyond anything I expected. Don and I share our home now. I have friends who know me as Natalie, not as someone's emergency contact with excellent credit. I have my little countryside place, my ridiculous vegetable spreadsheet, and enough peace that sometimes I still don't know what to do with it. For years I believed my family's biggest problem was that they needed too much from me. I was wrong. The deeper problem was that I'd confused rescuing people with loving them. Every time Shannon fell, I caught her before she hit the ground. Every time my parents overspent, I covered the difference. I thought I was protecting them. Really, I was protecting them from consequences. And consequences turned out to be the one thing capable of teaching all of us. Shannon learned to work. My parents learned to budget. And I learned something harder. Being needed isn't the same as being loved. I don't know what my relationship with my family will look like 5 years from now. Maybe we'll rebuild it. Maybe we won't. But one thing will never change. The family ATM is closed. Permanently. Natalie O'Brien is still a daughter, still a sister, still someone capable of helping people she loves. But I'm no longer willing to purchase my place in anyone's life. And Strangely enough, thousands of miles from the house where my father once told me I wasn't welcome, I finally found something worth far more than every dollar I'd spent trying to keep my family happy. A life that actually belongs to me.